Well, good afternoon. We've been really blessed with a lot of great panels, a lot of great sessions, and this is no exception. We're very excited to be with you today. My name is Gary Doxey. I'm one of the associate directors of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies here at the Law School of BYU, with one of the programs, I guess we're the main organizer of this program, so it's exciting to have you with us. We have a panel on practical peacemaking, pluralism and peacemaking on college campuses. And we've got with us a distinguished panel of young folks who have been on college campuses working on some of these projects. They've got plenty of experience. And we're going to get started, but let me just introduce to my left Shira Hoffer, who has been at Harvard College, and then we've got YuQing Jiang, has been at Stanford, both recent graduates, and then Alex Keogh and Mirabella Archibald Keogh, who are with us and part of the significant projects. Shira is the founder and executive director of the Viewpoints Project. Reads a little differently on your program. And YuQing is president emeritus of the Stanford Political Union. Alex and Mirabella are the founders of the Peacemaker project at BYU. We're going to go in this order. We'll first hear from Shira, then we're going to pass the mic to Alex and Mirabella, and finally to YuQing.
Okay, and I've started my timer. Is this okay into the mic? Okay, fantastic. So hello, and yes, the program says the Institute for Multipartisan Education. We're rebranding as we speak, so I apologize for that confusion. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my thesis research, which I think is quite relevant to the theme of this topic, and give you a bit of background on the challenges around campus speech and dialogue that we're facing as really a nation, and then pass off to my peers who really have some interesting case studies to share with you. So, as if it wasn't clear from this morning, I come from a Jewish background, and one thing that we Jews are really good at is disagreement and argument, and really trying to grapple with challenging perspectives. And it's something that's been an important part of my upbringing and an important part of coming to Harvard. I was excited to kind of take that on a global scale. So take that kind of grappling and hearing different perspectives and learn from people of different faiths and different backgrounds and different political persuasions and all of these kind of aspects of diversity. And I found that, unfortunately, that was not the norm. I had several instances of being told, we don't ask questions like that. I don't want to talk to you if you believe this. These challenges that maybe you've been reading about in the media. And that really is what inspired me to pursue a training to become a mediator. So I'm a small claims court mediator. I don't know if any of you have small claims court backgrounds, but I volunteer in small claims court. And learned all of these really great communication skills through mediation, and wished that my peers kind of had similar skills to engage, especially after October 7th. That was really a turning point for me and for understanding really the extent to which we face these dialogue challenges on college campuses after Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th of 2023. And so I did two things. I founded a nonprofit called the Viewpoints Project, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. I want to talk first about my thesis research, which I ended up looking into how religious and secular students approach controversial conversations in different ways. So I measured kind of 5 aspects of healthy speech behavior and looked at how religious and secular students do it differently. So before I jump into that, I want to share some numbers with you that will hopefully paint a bit of a nuanced perspective for us all to talk about in a little bit. So there's data that suggests that 50% of students are afraid to share their perspectives on controversial topics, that just under half will self-censor 1 or 2 times per month in the classroom, with their friends, in the library, wherever it might be. Their biggest concern typically is social punishment. They're afraid of what their peers will say about them or to them and what the ramifications of that might be. And 2/3, in fact, when asked what their reason is to be afraid, they say it's social punishment. And so that is maybe what you've been seeing if you've been reading headlines in the media. We have a crisis, students don't talk to each other, everything is really horrible, the future of democracy is doomed, et cetera, et cetera. I also want to say, though, that 2/3 of students, when asked, what would you do if you heard a perspective that you disagreed with, responded by saying, I would ask more questions to learn more. So we have 2/3 who say they're afraid, but also 2/3 who say what they would do to respond is ask more questions. And when you ask students about the value of free speech, the value of listening with an open mind, over 90% of students will affirm that value. So there's interesting statistical methods here and kind of a desirability bias that we can certainly discuss. But there's another picture that we're here, I think, to talk to you about today, that students really want this type of engagement. The kind of exhausted majority of students in the middle want to be able to engage more productively across lines of difference. And in particular, for my thesis, though this is not the topic of this conversation, religious students on 4 out of 5 measured axes demonstrated more healthy speech behaviors. So they were more likely to engage proactively with perspectives they disagreed with, less likely to cancel others for the perspectives that they held. So on the theme of religious freedom for this conference, there's some really interesting implications there. But kind of armed both with my mediation training and this knowledge that this is something that students really want, I put together this 501c3, and my team and I did a landscape analysis to understand where the gaps are in this type of programming on college campuses. And the biggest one that we found is that the students who sign up for the existing programs, they're awesome, and they're the ones who need this type of programming the least, because they're the ones who are like, yes, I care about this, I'm going to sign up for it. The people who I'm and my organization is really concerned about are the people who would probably nominally be part of that 2/3 who said they would ask questions, and part of that 90% who say they care about free speech, but don't really have the tools or the skills or the format to be able to engage. And so the Viewpoints Fellowship, which is the college student fellowship that my organization runs, we work to work through student clubs, student organizations, to align the skills of what we call curious disagreement with goals that student organizations already have: more readership in their newspaper, more goals on the lacrosse field, and kind of empower these student leaders to talk about this framework in terms of their club, to empower their peers to approach differences within their club and then beyond with curiosity, with the hope of saturating college campuses to be able to develop this culture of curiosity toward disagreement. So what I want to leave you with, maybe not first of all, but first of all, is we're looking for new schools for our 2026-2027 cohort. So if you represent a school and you want to talk about that afterwards, I'd be delighted to connect. But that there is more nuance, I think, to what you may have read online about this issue, and that what most kind of warms my heart in this field is that it's much more hopeful, actually, than it seems. That students like myself, like the 4 of us, and like 80% of students on college campus really want to have the skills to be able to engage in this way and want the fora to be able to do so. And so we're excited to tell you about these programmings today. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear us okay? Just want to make sure that's good for the live stream. Hi, my name's Alex Keogh, and I'm a senior at Brigham Young University studying psychology and Chinese.
Hi everyone, my name is Mirabella Keogh, and yes, I am married to this man. And I am also a senior, and I am studying public health and Middle Eastern studies in Arabic.
Yeah, and we're super thrilled to be here today, especially since Shira and YuQing have been our friends for a while now in this space of peacemaking on college campuses. And we're delighted to hear about their insights and to bring some of the information that we've learned from other college campuses today and talk about what we've learned. So first, we'll talk a little bit about the Peacemaker project on BYU campus, but the focus will be on a higher level, what we're learning about what works and what doesn't work for student civil discourse initiatives on college campuses across America. So the Peacemaker Project is an academic student association housed in the political science department at BYU. Like most good things in my life, this was Mirabella's idea originally, and we both did debate in high school, and our idea of a fun Friday night is sitting around with our friends and kind of fighting about politics, and then getting some ice cream afterwards and calling it good. And that's what we were used to, and it was a little bit of a culture shock to get out of like that debate team environment and see that not everybody felt really comfortable talking about things they disagree with. We also noticed that at BYU we have a specific situation where, as opposed to other campuses where you can't get people to stop talking about politics in an inflammatory way, at BYU sometimes we have a tendency not to even dare disagree with someone else because we're not used to doing it. And so we noticed this gap on BYU campus, and we decided with some student government experience and involvement in other areas on campus that we wanted to channel that into bringing President Nelson's Peacemakers Needed address in 2023, and turning it into a campus organization and using President Nelson's words sort of as our organization charter. And so that's what the Peacemaker Project has done, and through a series of debates and dinners and dialogues and expert trainings, including from Professor Stephen Collis, who we'll hear from in the next session, in his recently released book, The Habits of a Peacemaker. Through these events, we've been able to engage students in the work of peacemaking, which can sort of feel like an amorphous concept to students, but we hope that by engaging, that their hearts and minds are changed, and that they're equipped with the skills to do that productively in their lives.
Yeah, so we were so lucky to receive a lot of support at BYU and also to see a lot of success. And we saw that students were really excited by this idea of coming together and disagreeing in a productive way. And that kind of led us to think and to hypothesize that this isn't unique, and that students across America are very eager for this sort of engagement. We also kind of hypothesized that, unlike kind of what Shira was saying, what you might see in the media, students are quite sick of kind of the despair in politics and are searching for something hopeful. And so we decided we wanted to understand a little bit more of what that looked like beyond BYU. So we were very lucky with some support from administration to receive a grant to research and to go to other college campuses across the US and research a few questions that we had about peacemaking on college campuses. And kind of the questions that we were focusing on was, one, what makes student leaders who are eager to create an environment of peacemaking or of depolarization on their campuses, what makes them successful and how can we replicate that? And we were also kind of wanting to understand, why is this important? Like, we really believe that students are this bulwark of democracy in society, but what can we learn about what students are doing on college campuses that can be applied to a broader context, I guess you could say, in actually helping society flourish when it comes to these conversations and dialogues. So we went to 15 different campuses across the US. That's how we met both Shira and YuQing and got exposed to the great work that they're doing. So we went to 15 college campuses. We interviewed many different students as well as professors who are researching this topic, and we learned a lot of really interesting things. Our data is very preliminary, so we can't say really anything definitively about this is the thing that makes you successful as a student leader. But we discovered some themes, and we have some preliminary thoughts that we'll talk a little bit about. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about in terms of what we saw through our interviews and our college visits at these different universities was that the individuals who were very successful and who were able to be bridge builders and able to bring people together in a way that was unique and that was powerful and that generated support and excitement were often those who were in the ideological minority in the community. So what this might look like was, for example, we met with a Republican conservative student at Berkeley campus who obviously is in the ideological minority, but was very successful in his ability to kind of, I guess, maybe offer a peace branch, an olive branch, because it was a lot more powerful coming from him when he went to people who were in the majority and say, I'm curious about you and I want to know more about your beliefs. And they were much more receptive to someone wanting to learn more who was from a minority group. And so he was very successful in the work that he did. We also saw this at UT Austin. We met two students who had started an organization called Atidna International that focused on bringing Jewish and Palestinian students together. And both of these students were minorities on the campus, and also were both minorities within their respective groups. They both faced really significant challenges from both of their communities, who maybe felt some frustration about maybe the normalization that they were doing through their dialogue efforts, but because they were exhibiting this behavior that was not the ideological expectation, they saw a lot of really amazing success.
Yeah, I want to quickly talk about two of our other preliminary findings, and maybe we can talk about more as we get into the Q&A. But one thing that we're finding as we go to these different campuses is that when it comes to civil discourse initiatives, it definitely is not a one-size-fits-all situation for different campuses. We've saw a lot of rich diversity on the different campuses that we visited. We went to campuses with a religious affiliation, like Baylor University or Notre Dame, and that was part of our research, understanding how other faith-based institutions approach peacemaking and how their religious background informs the work that they're doing. We also went to other secular institutions. We went to institutions that are really research focused. We went to other institutions that were primarily student focused. And although it's tempting for us to try to export a model that we believe works onto different college campuses, this was done to varying success on different campuses. So it's tough to say that because a national organization exists and we could just take their model and implement it on every campus. We found that most successful models, such as Stanford's model that YuQing will talk about in a minute, was when the students were passionate, they tailored the organization to the needs of the university, they had good relationship with faculty, and they had strong networks. That was our third finding that we wanted to talk about, is strong networks. It won't surprise any sociologists to know that we found that in creating a successful movement on the campus, more important than like the silver bullet intervention was the powerful networks that students had and across faculty resources and understanding what's going on other college campuses. So that has led us to what we want to do, which is to create a coordinated network across campuses. This August, we'll be hosting at Brigham Young University a conference where we are hosting student leaders from across America who are doing analogous peacemaking initiatives and creating a network of students who can talk to each other and meet online monthly and continue to have in-person gatherings to inspire each other and share what's working on different campuses to create some accountability and cross-pollination. And that's going to be a part of what we believe makes this national movement successful.
And I will just end by saying that I think probably one of the most powerful things that we learned through our different visits is that students really do care and that they are interested in becoming these sorts of individuals who can bridge divides. Many of them aren't sure how to exactly do that, but they are invested in a hopeful future and are excited to participate in one.
Hi, everyone. It's a great honor and privilege to be here with you all and to speak about the Stanford Political Union and the work that we've been doing in the constructive dialogue space. I wouldn't consider myself by any means to be an expert, just a recent college graduate. So I'll mostly speak from experience about the things that we've done this year. It's been a lot of iteration over time. We've had many events, and we've kind of over time tried to revise the mechanisms and philosophies that have kind of underpinned our programming, and we've taken bits and pieces from different sorts of initiatives that have existed in the space. But to start, the Stanford Political Union was actually founded in 1938 by some kid who went for a voyage abroad to Oxford and saw their political union. And I was like, oh, we should have this at Stanford. And then he founded the political union, and it was dead for 2 decades. And then someone revived it, and we had some prominent speakers, and then it was dead for centuries. And someone tried to revive it again in the 21st century. Didn't really catch on. And when I got to Stanford, it was really in the midst of, what would you say, cancel culture. And there was a big issue of self-censorship on campus, especially for conservative and religious students. So very, very issues that we would consider uncontroversial now, they weren't able to speak about those at all, just 3-4 years ago. So seeing the issue, which in part was caused by political polarization, Myself and some other folks wanted to revive the Stanford Political Union as a forum for vibrant discussions about pressing issues. And I think what would you say, the unique or the innovation that we really wanted to bring was to fashion ourselves not after the East Coast debating societies, where the idea is to, dress up in suits and, do parliamentary procedure and dress each other as Sir and Madam Speaker. Is that how you guys do it, Harvard? There you go. Yeah. Not our speed, right? Stanford's West Coast. We have a more say innovative spirit. So we wanted to have a pioneering political union. So we really honed in on the idea of dialogue, not debate. And core to that is this idea that we want everyone to come together on a weekly basis to have discussions about issues that they care about. It's not an intellectual exercise for folks who are trying to get into politics, but rather STEM majors, CS majors, entrepreneurs, everyone, to talk about these difficult issues that they wouldn't otherwise have space to talk about. No dress code. We serve boba. Do you guys get boba out here? Is that a thing? Yeah, we serve boba at all our events. Very popular. It's like a soda. You guys are big on soda, right? Yeah, it's like soda for you guys. And attracts a lot of people. And we have guiding norms, and we have 3 types of events. We have speaker events, we have community discussions, and we have conferences, which are dialogue driven, and we do them with Bay schools from across the Bay, such as UC Berkeley, and San Jose State, and St. Mary's College. And the aim of all of our events is to foster constructive dialogue in Stanford with the hope of exposing students to diverse viewpoints, teaching them the tools to disagree better, and also inspiring further civic engagement. So with our discussion events, we've touched on issues such as DEI, free speech, transgender athletes, and we have small group discussions with a context setting segment where we present folks with perhaps multiple sides of the issue, and then we have small group discussions with a moderator and guiding questions and guiding norms. And finally, there's a bigger share, and that happens every week. We also have speaker events where we bring in people that we think can meaningfully contribute to campus discourse. In this past year, we've had the former Secretary of the HHS, Javier Becerra, the former Secretary of Defense, Jim Mathers, among other folks, to talk about various issues. And the ethos of our speaker events is not to bring someone in and kind of have them preach and lecture about what they believe, but rather engage in a dialogue with them. So that's been very tricky and something that we've been trying to really figure out how to carry out. So we obviously want to be cordial, treat them as a guest, but at the same time, we don't want to just endorse their ideas, but rather to grapple with them and to engage critically with those ideas. And finally, with our conferences, it's a day-long conference with a combination of speaker events, panels, and also these discussions, and also more pedagogical stuff that help students to become better at disagreeing. And I think the big takeaway from our events and programming this year, well, there's a few. I think the first is, as you all kind of mentioned, the issue with discourse on campus isn't really conversations will go awry, but rather self-censorship, right? I think with us, we really we've tried really hard to bring in folks who have very conservative, very religious beliefs, and make the environment as comfortable as possible for them to feel brave enough to express those beliefs, as opposed to trying to mediate heated discussions. We've had discussions about Israel-Palestine. It never got so heated that we need to intervene to a significant degree, but rather the issue has been people have not been inclined enough to truly say what they believe, and everyone has been a bit too timid. And I think, as Shira mentioned, the issue is like this social punishment that's looming, right? Frankly, there's no positive incentives for speaking your mind about a controversial issue, right? But the downsides are massive. So that's something we've been grappling about as well. And I think one of the events I wanted to highlight was a panel discussion with the co-chairs of the 2 committees on bias that were set up after October 7th at Stanford. So a committee on anti-Semitism, anti-Israeli bias, and a committee on anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, and anti-Arab hate. So we brought the co-chairs of the committees together. We had them kind of share their findings and their methodologies and places where they agreed and disagreed. I think we're one of the only schools to have done an event like that, because many schools kind of sanction these committees, and they all produce these 200-page reports that no one's going to read, not even folks from the affected communities. So we brought them in and we had a discussion. We had them sit on a panel and kind of discuss their findings with students, and that was incredibly fruitful and a win. It broke down a lot of the perceptions that people had about the nature of these committees and the nature of their disagreements. Right? They didn't actually hate each other. Their mission was the same. Right? It was about addressing the issue of bias on campus, and they found many things that were in common, but also many things that diverged. And it was really interesting to have them engage in discussion with each other and with campus as a whole. And I think the final, the takeaway I kind of want to highlight is that there have been many things that we kind of thought about over this year, and many things that have percolated as we've done more and more events, because we've definitely gotten pushback from many areas of campus and many sections of the student body. And the thing we've grappled with the most is the role of dialogue among other forms of expression. I think there's a natural tendency being in the dialogue space to say, okay, dialogue is better than protest, and it's better than social activism. We should engage civilly. We should be civil and speak nicely to each other. And that's better than the unconstructive ways of dealing with issues. And I think at the Stanford Political Union, we have been much less ambitious without claim. We see dialogue as one tool in the toolkit of civic engagement, alongside protest, alongside social activism, alongside voting. And we are neutral. Obviously, we're nonpartisan to the topics, but we're also, I think, nonpartisan to the mode of expression. We do dialogue, but we don't say that that is the best way to engage. But it's just one thing among the many ways of engaging. And I think that's helped us bring in a lot of the folks that wouldn't otherwise engage with dialogue. Especially with the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? I think a lot of the rhetoric has been around, look at these protesters, look at these people doing the sit-ins and the hunger strikes. That's not productive. Why don't they come and talk to us? But I think for us, the way we framed it is that what they're doing is valid in their own right, and we're providing another venue of engagement, and that has really helped us bring in folks on the more at places where they more vehemently disagree with the opposite side, and kind of brought them in and have them discuss these issues in a much more, in an alternative way that they wouldn't otherwise do. And I think that's been a learning. And we've also have tried to kind of strike the balance between that and making sure that things stay constructive, because not always bringing in all voices isn't always the most constructive way to go about things. But I'll leave it at that, and I think I'll leave it to the Q&A to kind of discuss further insights from the political union. Yeah.
Well, thank you. These have been terrific introductions and thoughts that we can get started on. You've noticed, of course, that what our panelists have been working on is not specific to religious freedom. It has to do with other forms of agreement and dialogue and speech and all kinds of other things. I want to observe as the moderator that what they are portraying, however, is the practice, the good practice of religious freedom in a way, even though it applies beyond religious freedom. They are good representatives of how one, if you can put it this way, how one lives out religious freedom ideals. And religious freedom, as you know, I've got to put in a plug for history. I'm a history professor. Religious freedom in history is the first of the rights, the first of the civil rights historically. And it had very much to do with validating dissent. Not disqualifying somebody because they disagree with you or they hold a different opinion, but validating the legitimacy of differing viewpoints. And out of those roots, which were motivated by fervent religious belief, but out of those roots grew civil rights. And so we are seeing some great folks who are practicing the ideals of religious freedom. One other little thing I need to say as a representative of our center is that one of our key concerns is to help the rising generation learn and take the baton and become great representatives and advocates of religious freedom and the ideals related to religious freedom. And so I just want to, this is just a little congratulations. You guys are great. I'm glad you're here, and you are you're helping fulfill our desires to see this kind of work filter down into the next generation. So we're grateful for that. So those are my editorial comments to begin, but let's open it up to the Q&A right now, and we'll take your questions or your observations. We've got a good 20 minutes, I think, left, and let's have you ask questions. Oh, and I'm going to say you've got to use this microphone to ask the question, but please.
Thank you so much. Wonderful words from each of you, and we're very grateful for the efforts individually that you've done in each of your fields. Very impressive. This question is for YuQing and is directed towards your experience with everything that you've just wrapped up with your higher education experience. How do you plan on do you have plans for implementing practical peacemaking as you have done now in the future for either college campuses, those of your age, peers, friends, family? What's the new direction that you're going with now that you've wrapped that chapter up? How do you anticipate keeping the momentum that you've built thus far as you move forward? And I hope, yeah, we'll see.
Great question. Do you want to say your name and where you're from?
Oh, yes. My name is,
at the Stanford Political.
yeah, my name is Bryson, and I work here with the center. So thank you.
Thank you for the question, Bryson. I'm not sure about maybe the long-term future, but for next year, I'll be working at Stanford on campus with the newly launched campus-wide ePluribus initiative. So it's a campus initiative launched by the university that seeks to foster a culture of constructive dialogue and critical inquiry and civic engagement at Stanford. It has been a priority of our new president. And the idea is to kind of uplift all the efforts that are around campus that foster dialogue. So among them is the Stanford Political Union, which is student-led. But also we have a incoming freshman dialogue training program where we bring in about 160 newly admitted freshmen and have them do this virtual program before they come to Stanford, where they do an activity called the Civic Self-Portrait. So they make these like beautiful slideshows about the values and experiences and people that have influenced their upbringing, and they share that with each other. And they also learn about ways to ask what we call dialogic questions, so curious questions about what other people believe and why they believe those things. So they get to know a cohort of folks with diverse views before they even come in, and then practice those skills in these small group settings, discussing a contentious issue. And we also have the Deliberative Democracy Lab, who do wonderful work through deliberative polling, which is these like big nationwide deliberations with like a scientific sample. They just finished one up in Philly, I believe, called American One Room. And we also have more pedagogical programs, such as training staff and residential assistants on skills such as active listening and ways to manage disagreements and ways to foster the values that are valued in constructive dialogue. So I'll be working with that organization to kind of uplift those initiatives, and maybe there'll be also some capacity building work at other campuses too. So that's me.
Are there other questions?
Thank you all for being panelists. This is great. I'm like 40 years older than you, so I can ask from a certain perspective. You wanted names. My name is Jeff. I spent a number of years as a U.S. Foreign Service officer, so I've been around the world. And my question has to do with demonstrations. Now, some cultures put a pretty dim view on demonstrations, and others love it, thrive in it. And without getting into history, that's your space. a lot of social change comes about, at least aided by demonstrations, right? So I can, there's sort of two ends of the spectrum, peaceful dialogue, it's all wonderful, and I completely appreciate that. And I should announce also, I'm a believer. I follow our president of our church who wants us to be peacemakers. But I've seen where demonstrations are necessary. A lot of people, especially on campus. I have a son who's at Columbia. He's an activist on campus there, sort of the epicenter of a lot of these social issues. Sometimes students want to express outrage about a given issue. And peaceful dialogue is wonderful, but sometimes they just want to express outrage and get cameras on them and get attention, and because they want to actually not only express outrage, but they want to affect change. They want to see policies shift, move the needle, however you want to say it. So I'm wondering, I laud your efforts to engage in peaceful dialogue and whatnot. What's your opinion on, can you have a loud and civil voice? Can you demonstrate in the tens of thousands or whatever? And we just saw across the country, the No Kings, is that all bad because you're out on the streets with signs and yelling stuff? Some people would argue that's a good thing, depending on your political point of view. So I don't want to hear from this rising, awesome generation what your feelings are about demonstrations relative to peacemaking and dialogue. Thanks.
Let's pass this one to Shira.
Sure. Short answer to your question, is it bad? No, definitely not. I think I really like the way that YuQing has framed it as a tool in your toolkit. That's the way that our fellowship frames it as well. I like to remind people, so I'll give you an example. Some of the pro-Palestinian protesters on Harvard's campus last year, one of their demands was a meeting with Alan Garber, the president of Harvard. Alan Garber granted this demand, and they turned around and said, we refuse to speak with you because you are complicit in genocide. And I found that in an empathetic way, I understood where they were coming from and felt like, okay, you're putting down your foot, you're standing up for what you believe in, and that desire is laudable. And isn't that a bit ridiculous that you put out a demand and turned around and refused the demand because you didn't want to have the conversation? And I think, Nelson Mandela sat down with, pro-apartheid supporters in South Africa before apartheid was abolished. I like to remind people of the historical examples where social change is affected both by protest movements and by dialogue. Often one comes first. Often there'll be protest movements which will lead to a meeting, which will lead to a movement, which will lead to a change. And so I would certainly not say that these protests and demonstrations are bad. I think respecting time, place, and manner restrictions in having these types of demonstrations is important in terms of not kind of disrupting the academic function of the university. But I think we need both. And the problem that I see is not that we have too many protests, but that often the people who are involved in the protests don't also have the skills. If they really are serious about being change makers, then they need the dialogue and the negotiation tools to be able to do so. And that, I think, is what's lacking. Do you want to add to that? Anyway?
Yeah, and just to provide a counterpoint to Shira's example, the Stanford had the longest sit-in for any pro-Palestinian protest this past year, and the sit-in space was incredibly dialogue-driven. So they had a table in front of the tents where they welcomed folks to kind of discuss the issue and debate the issue every day, and every day was folks manning the tables. And they also demanded a meeting with our president, and they met with our president. They spoke to our president. And I do think there are many people in the dialogue space who do use dialogue as a way to suppress dissent, as a way to invalidate other forms of expression. I don't think that's the view that the Stanford Political Union and myself take. We believe that dialogue is entirely compatible with protest and social activism, and we encourage all forms of civic engagement, and all forms of civic engagement are also up for debate, right? Like their validity and their effectiveness, but we definitely see no tension, and we don't want to make the claim, again, too ambitious, like dialogue is everything. It's not, right? It's one tool in the toolkit, and you can choose to engage with it, and you can also do other things alongside it.
I might just add one little thought. I think one misconception there is about the dialogue space and the peacemaking space is that in order to be an effective peacemaker, you need to be neutral on all issues. And I actually think, kind of like our research revealed, that in order to be effective peacemaker, you need to be really committed to your values and you need to have really strong opinions, but you need to, as Shira was mentioning, you need to have these skills where you also respect other people who have really deeply committed values, so that you can have effective conversations. But being a peacemaker in no way means that you are not passionate enough that you're going to take to the streets to advocate for an issue that you care about.
Very good. Yes, another question here, and then one over here.
Hi, I'm Scott Goodwin. I'm in the Office of Belonging here at BYU. A little while ago, we read an article that was about a lot of these campuses that have been disrupted by contentious issues, right? I mean, we've seen university presidents having to step down for some of these conflicts. And one of the takeaways from that article was those things are less likely to reach that fever pitch if there is a robust sort of infrastructure in the university for having these forms of civic dialogue. And so that raises a question in my mind that I'm lobbing off on you, which is, what does that infrastructure look like? I mean, how do you reach the largest number of people on a campus, right? Is it curricular? Certainly curriculum is part of it, right? But what else would you like to see if you had your way, right? What would that sort of civic dialogue infrastructure look like at a university?
Alex, can you take this one?
Yeah, I'll offer a couple comments, and if someone has something to add on, I'd love to hear from you. But I'd say the first thing that I'd emphasize for student leaders is that there's a really fine balance between being able to have access to resources by having great relationship with administration or institutionalizing your organization. That gives you more access to resources, but at the same time, you have to be careful who you're accepting resources from and the conditions on the resource acceptance, or else it becomes something that's not led by students anymore. So specifically to answer your question about like exposure, curriculum, we found through our interviews, most faculty were saying curriculum is the number one way to do that. We got to get it into classes because students are required to come to classes. Otherwise, they have tests and they have other things that they need to do. They're not going to be incentivized to participate. I think that's a really important part, but I think it's only part. I think if it only comes from faculty in a top-down approach, then it will never ignite students' hearts and minds in a way that can be transformative. So I think that curriculum, which can reach students across the entire university, is really important, but it can't come at the total expense of the organic student leadership. When we were talking with students across campuses, the most successful student movements were the ones where a student had an idea, a student innovated an old idea, a student brought something back to life, or a student started something. Someone told a student they couldn't do something and they went out and did it anyway. Like that is what got other students really excited and on board. Sometimes students can be tempted to try to institutionalize their organization in a way that might remove student control. And sometimes institutions are really excited to do the same thing and kind of take over something successful that a student has created. Our advice to students would be really cautious of that trade-off. Yeah. Anything else?
Maybe just going also back again to something that Shira said earlier, if you really want students who historically might not be interested in this sort of discussion, you kind of have to think about what is sexy to students. And unfortunately, sometimes administrations aren't that sexy to students. But what is really exciting for students is getting together with other students who are passionate about something. And so I think that's why the organizations that we've seen across different campuses have been really successful.
Got a question over here.
Hi, my name is Thomas. I'm a student here at BYU, working at the center. But you guys have mentioned a few times trying to help students learn these skills of better peacemaking and a better dialogue. I'm just curious, from your experience, what are like the specific skills that you've found are most impactful for students to help them improve on these, better dialogue skills and peacemaking skills?
Sure. I think we're one mic short. All right, I'll give you a good one that you can learn right now, and then you'll just start noticing when people don't do it, and then you'll start feeling annoyed. So I apologize, and also you're welcome at the same time. We call this one "Do Not Don't," which is the difference between "do you think" and "don't you think." And it came up. I learned it first in my mediation training, which was 40 hours long. So it's good that there's only 5 minutes left. But the idea is that there's a very strong difference between asking somebody, "Do you think?" Fill in the blank, and "don't you think?" fill in the blank. Both of them end with a question mark, but the first one is an invitation to share a perspective, and the second one is really an accusation or putting the words in somebody else's mouth, and then kind of inflecting your voice a little bit at the end so that you sound a little bit less like a jerk. And so you can say do not do and don't, should and shouldn't, is it the case versus isn't it the case. So if I say, if somebody says to me, Shira, don't you think that the way that the U.S. enforces immigration law right now is really harmful to society? That's going to put me on the defensive. Whereas if somebody says, do you think, or tell me your thoughts about the way that the U.S. enforces immigration, right? One of them is an invitation, one of them is an accusation. So that I think you'll start noticing it. People will start saying to you, well, isn't it the case that this, and you're going to hear it, and you're going to think about this moment when I'm telling you this thought. But it's a really, really powerful tool to be able to shift the tone in a conversation in such a simple way. And honestly, I think if everyone started doing that tomorrow, the tone of our conversations across the country would really change quite significantly. So that's just one.
Anything else to add?
I think one thing that we've really kind of harped on about at Stanford at the Stanford Political Union is making sure that we frame discussions right. I think it's very difficult to kind of talk about or just to say the word politics without also thinking about the word debate. But what we do, and I think folks here as well, is dialogue and not debate, right? Whereas debate has winners and losers, and the idea is to persuade and change people's minds. Dialogue is focused on fostering greater mutual understanding of an issue, right? I have this belief here. Let me share my belief with you so you know more about what I think. And I want to hear more about what you think and have a deep understanding of that, right? Because we have to live together on this campus somehow, but we don't have to make a decision, right? There's no decision to be made. We're not in Congress. So all we have to do is to talk with the end of great understanding. And I think if we framed conversations like that, things will be productive because there's less at stake.
One more question? Yes, please.
Okay.
You have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have some.
Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm from the Philippines. I'm an international student from BYU, Hawaii. This question is specifically for Shira. I'm very curious about the fellowship project. Can you tell us more about it and how you've established it, how you've been applying it to campuses so far? Because I'm very curious to kind of see it in my campus where it's all international. It's like students from the Asia Pacific and not specifically very domestic.
Yeah, well, first of all, if anyone wants to invite me to Hawaii, I'll never
Please.
say no. Yeah, so the Viewpoints Project it's a 501c3. It's a nonprofit that works to foster curious disagreement in education settings. So we do some middle and high school consulting. We also have this fellowship for college students, and we're piloting the program right now at Dartmouth College and at Elon University. So they started out in May with kind of a campus kickoff. We'll have a retreat in September, and then they'll do programming. The program is led by other college students. That's one of the kind of innovations to the theme of sexy. It's much more fun when it's led by your peers than led by not your peers. So they'll work for the whole year, the fall semester, working on a program in their student club, and in the spring semester with their peers for a campus-wide capstone project. So the way that it works is we have to partner formally with an institution in order to open the fellowship to the students on that campus, because we find, one of the gaps that we discovered in the landscape analysis is if you don't have kind of institutional buy-in and you don't have a critical mass, you're not going to make change. So we could have opened it to the whole country and probably gotten a lot more fellows, but it would have been 1 or 2 from, 50 different campuses. And we think it'll be more effective if we have, 10 or 20 on one campus and start to kind of plant the seeds of longer term institutional change. So that's, what we're up to right now. We're certainly looking for more campuses, but really testing out this model, I think, for the next 2 or 3 years, and then deciding, are we going to scale for breadth? Are we going to scale for depth? How are we going to make a financially sustainable model? How is the, the nonprofit, which currently thrives on individual contributions, able to accept more national grants, other things like this.
Thank you. We've got time for just one more question, please.
Okay, I just thought it was an interesting observation. My name is Grant. I'm a student here at BYU. I thought it was interesting to hear YuQing say that on his campus they were focusing more on bringing out those who are self-censoring, which was the conservative religious voices. And here we have these BYU students who I imagine that's not a problem for you to bring out the conservative religious voices. And I was also just struck that you guys are concerned with self-censoring. For some reason, I don't know why I didn't think that was what was on your mind. But if you're concerned for these minority voices and you want them to speak out, I'm curious if you're more interested in bringing out the minority voices or if you're more interested in training the majority to be receptive to these minority voices, because otherwise I don't see why as a minority you would be willing to risk, like you said, that social punishment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can give a thought here, and then there's something I just wanted to say in closing. But thanks for that question. I think that's great. We're finding in the different people that we talk to across campuses that both are really important. And I think one great thing about this space is that there's organizations like a campus-specific organization that is, galvanizing students on one campus, and then there's organizations like Shira's organization is specifically designed to include those people who might not be the first person to raise their hand and say, I want to be part of a civil discourse initiative. But for us, it's less of a question of like competition. What's more important? Do we need peacemaking evangelists, or do we need to get into the nitty gritty and bring out those people who are the polarizers, and they need to be like the ones in the interventions. And the more we ask that question, the more I feel like the answer we're getting is those two things shouldn't be in competition, but both needs really need to be filled, and that's why I think we need to diversify the purpose of a lot of our different organizations, and that's another reason why we don't believe that a centralized organization or an organization that just exports one model onto different campuses is going to be most effective, because the different organizations do different things well. And so that's why we're grateful that all of us are representing different ways of approaching peacemaking on different campuses, and it's all very necessary. And that leads me to what I wanted to say, which is if you are a student here and you're really interested in getting involved in civil discourse initiatives, you want to make a difference as a peacemaker, or you're watching this recording, or if you know students who you'd like to get involved or want to understand how any of these ideas can be implemented on your campus, please come and talk to any of the 4 of us. We'd be very happy to speak with you. And this is part of what we're trying to do in coordinating a network that's national. And so in August, part of what we're going to be doing is creating the National Student Council for Peacemaking, where we can have these really interesting simulating conversations with people that don't even know that we exist right now, and coordinate those networks. So please come talk to us. And we believe, as President Nelson says, that we can change the world one conversation at a time.
We have just time for about a 30-second sound bite from each one. I think, Alex, you've had your 30
Yeah,
seconds.
that's my sound bite.
So let's start with Shira, then YuQing, and then Mirabella.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing to your question, which is there's an interesting question around, people talk about like safety. I don't feel safe. Is this a safe space? And people also talk about bravery. And it's just like creating a brave space, having the courage to speak up. And I think that we could have a whole panel about. So I'm happy to chat with you after. But I think Alex is right that we need both, and we need a sense of courage in the students who are worried about these fears, but we also need a sense, I don't like the term safety. I think instead we need a sense of open-heartedness, not necessarily open-mindedness, but open-heartedness to hearing perspectives that we find really challenging, and that those kind of go hand in hand. So I want to leave you with a couple of goals from this year's fellows, which will hopefully fill you with the hope that the world is not ending. Our fellows want to improve their ability to engage in conversations rather than to ignore them. They want to be more confident in sharing their perspectives, and they said they want to start dialogue and work toward understanding over triumph of ideas. So can we all hopefully adopt some of those goals going forward? And thanks for coming.
I think I pretty much covered most things I want to say, but I think just to reiterate, the main takeaway from all the work that myself and the Stanford Political Union have been doing this past year is that we really want to find ways to maximize the inclusiveness of spaces, right? And the word inclusiveness in the past have been used to stifle and suppress speech. So we want to, I guess, find the proper definition of inclusiveness, right? So that means bringing in people who have different identities and backgrounds, and also people have different perspectives and views and values. And in part, that means we also have to, like I said, make the claim of dialogue modest. So we bring in people who wouldn't usually be receptive to dialogue and have them come and use dialogue as another tool in their toolkit to deal with disagreement, to engage with others, and to gain a greater understanding of the people with whom they disagree.
I think I will just close by saying two things. Two. The first thing is that what I really hope that students take away from things that we're trying to do is that disagreement is a really positive thing, and that disagreement is akin to progress, and that unless we have people who are willing to disagree genuinely and who are able to voice their disagreements in a respectful way, then we're always going to be stuck in some sort of gridlock in society. And then the second thing I want to say is that I think what is so important in this effort is not necessarily that we're trying to change anyone's minds, but that we're trying to help people understand the common humanity that people have, and that you can disagree vehemently with someone and that you can respect them as a person of dignity and of a person who is valuable to society despite your disagreements. And I think that is really the heart of what we're trying to accomplish, if I would put it in my own words.
Well, let's give an applause to this. Thank you, Shira.